Hi class, today let's take some time to talk exactly about what plagiarism is. Now, first thing to start off with, what I want you to know about plagiarism is that plagiarism is both intentional and unintentional. And plagiarism includes turning in another person's essay, paper, or literary work for your own work. And this cartoon depicts a young man who is typing the exact words from the internet into his paper. He is copying the famous Charles Dickens novel, A Tale of Two Cities. Plagiarism includes copying a website, book, article, or other source of information. It also includes copying parts of sentences, full sentences, or several words. And it is a failure to properly quote and cite these sentences, phrases, or paragraphs that are being used. Now let's talk about a few definitions of plagiarism. To begin with, plagiarism is defined as stealing or passing off the ideas or words of another as your own. It is using another's production without crediting the source, committing literary theft, and it is presenting someone else's ideas or product as being yours. The last bullet point addresses U.S. copyright laws. Inside of the book cover and at the bottom of a web page are copyright symbols. Those copyright symbols are legal designations that work, the book, or the website, and the words in the book and in the website are property of the person who wrote the content. Therefore, if you copy those words from the book or website, not only are you plagiarizing, but you can also be violating copyright laws. Let's look at plagiarism now. It is copying a website. It is copying a website and putting in a URL without quotes, but it gets a little trickier. It is also copying a website, putting in quotes, and a URL or citation. We'll look at this specific example in just a moment. It is copying a website and putting in quotes and a URL. Again, we'll look at a specific example to help you understand better. And lastly, as we were mentioning before, it is copying sentences, words, even if it's just 2, 3, 4, 5 words from a book, an article, or website. Now, here's a funny little cartoon. Joe is upset with his teacher because he said he copied everything from the website and he got an F on his paper. And this is exactly the problem. Joe has copied this information from a website and none of the words are Joe's words. Even if he's using 3, 4, 5, or 6 words together from a website, book, article, or other source, this can still be considered plagiarism. Now, this is frequently what we see inside of the classroom, okay? Please understand this is very important. You cannot copy a website and put in the URL. This is by definition plagiarism. Over here on the side, you will see, what about the URL? Didn't I cite my reference? And what you need to know is that a URL is not a citation. The URL is a link to the web address that takes you to that web page. It is not a citation and it is not a reference. The other part of this is that this entire paragraph is copied. And again, you cannot copy words. Here's another example. A student copies a paragraph, puts in the URL, copies a paragraph, and puts in the URL. Okay, so the student decides, okay, now I'm going to outsmart my teacher and I'm going to put in quotes. Now, it is true that any words that you are taking from a book or a website need to be quoted. However, you cannot use an entire quote for your answer, okay? And the reason being is that you have to have writing in your own words. So there is the 80-20 rule, which is why I wrote 80-20 on this slide. 80% of the paper needs to be in your own words, and only up to 20% can be quoted. Now, APA has specific formatting for quotations over 40 words. So please keep it simple when you are writing. Only quote 1 or 2 sentences at the most. Do not quote full paragraphs, and please do not quote more than 40 words, because then you are going to be responsible for knowing these advanced levels of APA, okay? For the level that we are writing on, you do not need to know advanced APA. So please keep your quotes short and simple. But again, the point of this slide is that you cannot use an entire quote for your answer. And once again, the URL is not a correct citation, and the URL is also not a correct reference. Now, this is an example of what we call mosaic plagiarism. And this is where a student takes a few words from the website, and then they insert some of their own words, add words of the website, insert some of their own words, add words from the website. Well, this becomes a problem if a student is writing, and if more than 20% of those words are taken from the website. If you have more than 20% word similarity, meaning that you have copied the words from the website, then a 20% will constitute an academic integrity violation. Now, what about images? If you use an image inside of the classroom, it is required that you have to have a citation as well as a reference for that picture. Please understand, when you go to the internet, if you use Google or Firefox or Internet Explorer, when you cite and when you reference your image, then you cannot say Google, okay? Google is a search engine. You need to go to the website where the image is, and you need to reference the picture the same way you would a book, a website, or an article, okay? Now, what about citations? Citations are very different from references, okay? The reference is what goes at the end of your paper or the end of your discussion question. The citation is what goes into the paragraphs, and we'll look at examples of those in just a moment. The citation is taken from your reference list, and it is the author's last name and year. The citation is the author's last name, comma, the year, and the period always goes after the citation. There are other ways to cite. For example, you can say according to, and you would put in the author's last name and then put in the year of publication. That is another way that you can cite. Now, why do we use citations? You might be scratching your head and wondering why we use citations. In order to avoid plagiarism, we need to acknowledge the words that were used as well as where we found our information. We use citations when we quote, and we use citations when we paraphrase, because when you are paraphrasing, using the citation gives credit to where you found your information. Let's look at some examples. These are the author's exact words. Therefore, you put quotes around exact words. After the quotation, you put in the author's last name and year. The quotes say to the reader, these are the author's words, not my words. They are quoted. The author's last name and year tells the reader the name of the person who said that or wrote that, as well as the year. Notice that the period always goes after the citation because the citation is considered the end of the sentence. Here's another example. You can see here is our quote. Okay, so the quote starts here, ends here. Here is your citation, and the period goes after the citation. Here is another quote. This is actually a partially quoted sentence. Yes, you can quote a partial sentence. And then the student then used another word from that author. So they again followed up with a quote, and then they end it with the author's last name, comma, year, and the period goes at the end of the sentence. Now, when you paraphrase, you write in your own words. And when you are paraphrasing, again, you use citations to give credit to where you found your information. And you can see that this student has written a paragraph in their own words, and they have a citation and then another citation from the content that they have paraphrased from reading the work of these two authors. Now, here again is another example of citations. You can see that the student has paraphrased and they have their citation, paraphrased and they have their citation. So when exactly do we use citations? Always use citations with facts, also any numbers, including percentages, dates, ages, ratios, or any type of numerical information. Please use a citation. Here's another example of paraphrasing, writing in your own words. Here is the student's citation. Student citation, and again, notice the period is after the citation because that's considered the end of the sentence. Here is an example of both quotes. So these, again, are the author's words. The quotes designate the author's words, and the citation tells us who said it. Then there's some paraphrasing, and again, the paraphrasing tells the reader where we found our information that we wrote about. Now, remember our example of poor Joe who received an F on his paper for copying. Joe needs to paraphrase. He needs to use quotations, use citations, and have a properly formatted reference in his discussion. You can see that Joe has used a year, and because he has used a year, he has a citation. Joe also uses a quote, and after his quote, he has his citation, and then he has some paraphrasing, and then he has his citation, and a correctly formatted reference, not just the URL at the end. Now, here's our wrong example that we looked at earlier where the student copies the website and puts in the URL. Let's refresh our memory. Remember, a URL is not a properly formatted reference or citation. The URL is the address for that particular website. The reference, there's different formatting for references depending on if it's a book, a website, or an article. And the citation is the author's last name and year. So the correct example then, the student starts out with their citation, then they have their quote, they have some paraphrasing, they have their citation, they have some more paraphrasing, and then they have their citation, and then they end with a properly formatted reference. This is how your discussions should look for class. Again, please remember the wrong example, you cannot copy a website and put in a URL. That is by definition plagiarism. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you for watching the video today.